Thomas Mitchell had been living under the Interstate 95 overpass for 3 years when he heard the screams coming from the burning car. Most people would have called 911 and waited for help, but Thomas was a decorated Marine who had served 2 tours in Iraq, and when he saw 8-year-old Emma Crawford trapped in the back seat, his military training kicked in. What he did next would not only save her life, it would transform an entire neighborhood. It was 7:43 p.m. on a rainy October evening when Thomas heard the crash that would change everything. He had been settling in for the night under his section of the overpass, arranging the cardboard and blankets that served as his bed, when the sound of screeching tires and twisted metal echoed through the concrete tunnel above him. Thomas grabbed his flashlight, a military-grade tactical light he'd managed to keep through 3 years of homelessness, and ran toward the sound. What he found made his blood run cold. A silver BMW had crashed through the guardrail and flipped over, landing upside down about 50 yards from the freeway. Smoke was pouring from the engine, and he could smell gasoline mixing with the acrid odor of burning electrical components. But it was the sound that made him move without thinking, a child crying for help from inside the wreckage. Thomas's military training from the 2nd Marine Division took over immediately. He had pulled wounded soldiers from burning vehicles in Fallujah and Ramadi, and those skills had never left him, even after years of bureaucratic battles with the VA that had left him homeless and forgotten by the system he had served with honor. He approached the overturned BMW carefully, assessing the structural integrity and looking for the safest entry point. Through the shattered rear window, he could see a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, hanging upside down from her seatbelt. She was conscious, but terrified, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. "Hey there, sweetheart," Thomas called out in the calm, authoritative voice he had once used to reassure wounded Marines under fire. "My name is Thomas, and I'm going to get you out of there. I need you to stay very still and trust me, okay?" The girl looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. "I can't find my mommy. She's not moving." Thomas looked toward the front seat and saw an unconscious woman who appeared to be in her 30s, trapped by the steering wheel. She was alive but clearly injured seriously. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The smoke was getting thicker, and he could hear the ominous crackling sound that meant fire was spreading through the vehicle's electrical system. He had maybe 2 minutes before the car became an inferno. "What's your name?" Thomas asked the girl while pulling out his pocket knife to cut through the rear window framework. "Emma," she said, her voice shaking. "Emma Crawford. Is my mommy going to be okay?" Thomas recognized the Crawford name immediately. Rebecca Crawford was the CEO of Crawford Industries, one of Portland's largest construction companies. Her face had been on magazine covers and news stories for years. But right now, none of that mattered. What mattered was getting this child to safety before the car exploded. "Your mom is going to be fine, Emma, but I need to get you out first so we can help her together. Can you be brave for me?" Thomas used his knife to clear away the remaining glass and enlarge the opening enough to crawl partially into the vehicle. The smell of gasoline was stronger now, and he could see flames beginning to lick at the engine compartment. He had 60 seconds, maybe less. Working with the precision of someone who had performed emergency extractions under combat conditions, Thomas carefully cut Emma's seatbelt and supported her as gravity pulled her down from her inverted position. She was small enough that he could lift her easily, despite the cramped conditions and his own substantial injuries from 3 years of living on the streets. "Close your eyes and hold on to me as tight as you can," Thomas instructed as he carefully maneuvered Emma through the window opening. "We're going to move fast now." He pulled Emma from the wreckage just as the flames reached the fuel line. The explosion that followed threw both of them to the ground, but Thomas had instinctively covered Emma's body with his own, shielding her from the heat and debris. When Thomas looked back at the BMW, it was completely engulfed in flames. If he had been 30 seconds slower, Emma Crawford would have died in that fire. But Emma was safe, crying but uninjured except for minor cuts and bruises. Thomas held her close as they waited for the fire department and paramedics to arrive, his own hands shaking from adrenaline and the realization of how close they had come to tragedy. "You saved me," Emma whispered against his chest. "You're a hero." Thomas looked down at this 8-year-old girl who saw him as a hero, not as the homeless veteran that most of society ignored or feared. For the first time in 3 years, he remembered what it felt like to matter, to have purpose, to be someone whose actions could make a difference in the world. The paramedics arrived within minutes, followed by police and firefighters. Emma was taken to the hospital for observation, but her injuries were minor. Her mother, Rebecca, however, required emergency surgery for internal bleeding and multiple fractures. The doctor said she was lucky to be alive. Thomas gave his statement to the police, then quietly disappeared back to his overpass before the media crews arrived. He had learned from experience that homeless people were usually treated as suspects rather than heroes, and he didn't want Emma's rescue to be overshadowed by questions about his housing status or his struggles with the VA system. 2 days later, Thomas was surprised to see a black sedan pull up near his overpass encampment. A woman in an expensive business suit stepped out, followed by Emma Crawford, who was wearing a pink cast on her left arm, but otherwise seemed to have recovered completely from the accident. Thomas recognized Rebecca Crawford immediately, though she looked older and more tired than in her corporate photographs. Her left arm was in a sling, and she moved carefully, obviously still recovering from her injuries. "Mr. Mitchell," Rebecca called out hesitantly. "Thomas Mitchell?" Thomas stood up from where he had been sitting on a folding chair outside his tent, suddenly self-conscious about his appearance. 3 years of homelessness had taken their toll, and he knew he looked nothing like the decorated Marine who had once stood at attention in dress blues for award ceremonies. "Yes, ma'am. That's me." Emma broke away from her mother and ran toward Thomas, wrapping her good arm around his waist in an enthusiastic hug. "Thomas, I told Mommy all about how you saved me from the fire." Rebecca Crawford approached more slowly, and Thomas could see that she was struggling with emotion. When she spoke, her voice was thick with tears she was trying not to shed. "Mr. Mitchell, I don't know how to thank you adequately for what you did. You saved my daughter's life at considerable risk to your own safety. The fire department said the car exploded less than 30 seconds after you pulled Emma out." Thomas looked down at Emma, who was still hugging him and smiling up at him with the uncomplicated affection that only children can show. "Anyone would have done the same thing, ma'am. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "The police told me that at least 6 other drivers saw the accident happen, and they all just called 911 and kept driving. You didn't just call for help, you risked your life to save a stranger's child. That's not something that anyone would do." Rebecca looked around at Thomas's makeshift living situation, the small tent, the carefully organized supplies, the military precision arrangement that spoke to his training and discipline even in the most difficult circumstances. "Mr. Mitchell, I've done some research about you. You served 2 tours in Iraq with the Marines. You earned 3 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star for valor. You were wounded twice in combat operations. And then you came home and fought for 3 years to get the disability benefits you were entitled to, only to be denied due to bureaucratic errors and lost paperwork." Thomas nodded, unsurprised that someone with Rebecca Crawford's resources had been able to learn his story quickly. "The VA system is complicated. A lot of veterans fall through the cracks." "You shouldn't be living under a bridge," Rebecca said, her voice taking on the same firm tone she probably used in corporate boardrooms. "You shouldn't be homeless. You served your country with honor. You saved my daughter's life, and the system has failed you completely." Emma looked up at Thomas with curious eyes. "You lived under the bridge, like in fairy tales?" Thomas smiled down at her. "Something like that, sweetheart. But not all bridges have trolls. Some of them have Marines." Rebecca knelt down so she was at Emma's eye level. "Emma, remember how we talked about how Mr. Thomas helped you when you were scared and in danger?" Emma nodded seriously. "Well, now I think we should help Mr. Thomas. What do you think about that?" "Yes," Emma said immediately. "We should help him like he helped me." Rebecca stood up and looked directly at Thomas. "Mr. Mitchell, I want to offer you something. It's not charity, and it's not payment for saving Emma. It's an opportunity." Thomas felt his defenses go up automatically. 3 years of homelessness had taught him to be wary of offers that seemed too good to be true. "What kind of opportunity?" "I want you to come work for Crawford Industries. We have a new initiative focused on community development and veteran services. I need someone who understands both the challenges veterans face and the importance of giving back to communities that have been overlooked. Someone with your military leadership experience and your personal understanding of how our systems fail the people who need them most. Thomas stared at her, not sure he had heard correctly. You want to offer me a job? I want to offer you a career. The position is Director of Community Outreach and Veteran Services. The salary is $85,000 annually, plus full benefits including health care and housing assistance. But more than that, I want to give you the resources to help other veterans who are facing the same challenges you've faced. Thomas felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. There's one condition, Rebecca continued. I want you to help me understand what we can do for the other people living in situations like yours. Not just veterans, but all the people who have been forgotten or overlooked by our community. I want Crawford Industries to be part of the solution. Thomas looked around at the overpass area where he had lived for 3 years. There were currently about 15 other people living in various spots along the concrete supports, including 2 other veterans, a woman with 3 children who had been evicted from their apartment, and several people with mental health challenges who couldn't access appropriate services. You want to help all of them? I want to help as many as we can. Emma's accident made me realize that I've been so focused on building my business that I've ignored the people right here in my own community who need help. You showed me what real courage and compassion look like. Now, I want to learn from you. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what Rebecca was offering. This wasn't just about him. It was about creating systematic change that could help hundreds of people who had been abandoned by society. If I take this job, I want to start with housing, Thomas said finally. Safe, affordable housing with supportive services. A lot of people are homeless not because they're lazy or addicted, but because they can't afford rent on minimum wage jobs, or because they have disabilities that aren't being addressed, or because they're veterans who can't navigate the VA bureaucracy. Rebecca nodded. What would you need to make that happen? Land, construction resources, social workers and case managers who actually understand trauma and poverty, medical and mental health services, job training programs that lead to real employment, not just busy work. Thomas looked directly at Rebecca, and she could see the intelligence and leadership skills that had made him an effective Marine officer. Most importantly, we need to treat people with dignity. We need to recognize that homelessness is a systemic problem, not a personal failure. People need hope and opportunity, not judgment and charity. Rebecca extended her hand to Thomas. Mr. Mitchell, I think this is the beginning of something important. Will you take the job? Thomas looked down at Emma, who was watching this conversation with the intensity that children bring to important adult discussions. What do you think, Emma? Should I help your mom help other people? Emma grinned and gave him another hug. Yes, and you can live in a house instead of under the bridge. Thomas shook Rebecca's hand. Okay, Ms. Crawford, let's see what we can do. 6 months later, the Crawford Community Initiative had become a model for corporate social responsibility programs across the country. Using a combination of Crawford Industries' construction expertise and Thomas's understanding of the needs of homeless populations, they had created Portland's first comprehensive supportive housing community. The development, built on land donated by Crawford Industries, included 200 units of affordable housing, a community center with job training programs, a health clinic staffed by volunteer medical professionals, and a child care facility that allowed parents to work or attend school while their children were safely supervised. But perhaps the most innovative aspect of the program was Thomas's insistence that residents be involved in every aspect of planning and management. People who had been homeless were trained as case managers, maintenance workers, security guards, and administrative staff. The community was run by the people who lived there, not by outside organizations that thought they knew what was best for them. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Within 6 months, 78% of residents had found stable employment. Children who had been falling behind in school due to housing instability were catching up academically. Veterans who had been unable to access services through the VA were getting the medical and mental health care they needed. Thomas himself had been transformed by the work. The man who had once felt invisible and forgotten was now a nationally recognized expert on veteran homelessness and community development. He spoke at conferences, consulted with other cities on similar programs, and had been appointed to a federal task force on housing policy. But the change that meant the most to him happened on a Saturday morning, 8 months after Emma's accident. He was walking through the community center when he heard a familiar voice calling his name. "Mr. Thomas! Mr. Thomas!" Emma Crawford came running toward him, followed more slowly by her mother. Emma was no longer wearing a cast, and she looked healthy and happy. "Emma, how are you, sweetheart?" "I'm good. Mommy brought me to see the houses you built for people." Thomas knelt down to Emma's level. "What do you think of them?" Emma looked around at the community center, where children were playing games while their parents attended a job training workshop, where elderly residents were participating in a gardening program, where veterans were meeting for a support group. "They look happy," Emma said simply. "The people here look happy, like I was happy when you saved me from the fire." Rebecca joined them, smiling as she watched her daughter interact with the man who had become not just Emma's hero, but a hero to hundreds of people whose lives had been transformed by the Crawford Community Initiative. "Thomas, I wanted to tell you that the Portland City Council voted last week to replicate this model in 3 other locations around the city. And we've gotten funding requests from 12 other cities that want to start similar programs." Thomas stood up, looking around at the community that had grown from a simple conversation under a highway overpass. "You know what's funny?" Thomas said. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I was invisible, useless, forgotten. One moment of doing what I was trained to do, helping someone who needed help, changed everything." "You didn't just save Emma that night," Rebecca said quietly. "You saved me too. You reminded me what really matters, and you showed me that real leadership isn't about building a successful business. It's about building a community where everyone has a chance to succeed." Emma tugged on Thomas's sleeve. "Mr. Thomas, will you show me the garden where people grow food?" "Of course," Thomas said, taking her hand. "And Emma, thank you for letting me be your hero that night. It turns out that sometimes when you save someone else, you end up saving yourself too." As they walked through the community garden, where residents were growing vegetables to supply the on-site food bank and teaching children about nutrition and sustainability, Thomas reflected on the journey that had brought him from a homeless veteran to a community leader whose work was changing lives across the country. The night he had pulled Emma Crawford from that burning car, he thought he was just doing what any decent person would do. He had no idea that his actions would create a ripple effect that would transform not just his own life, but an entire approach to addressing homelessness and supporting veterans. Rebecca Crawford had offered him a job, but what she had really given him was the opportunity to turn his personal experience of being forgotten and overlooked into a systematic solution that ensured other people wouldn't fall through the same cracks. The Crawford Community Initiative had helped over 800 people find stable housing and employment in its first year of operation. The model was being replicated in cities across the country. Thomas had written a book about community-based solutions to homelessness that had become required reading in social work programs. But more importantly, he had proven that heroism isn't just about dramatic moments of physical courage. Sometimes the greatest heroism lies in the patient, persistent work of building systems that treat people with dignity and give them the tools they need to rebuild their lives. The homeless veteran who had once been invisible to society had become a voice for the voiceless, an advocate for the forgotten, and proof that everyone deserves a second chance to contribute something meaningful to the world. When people asked Thomas about the secret to the Crawford Community Initiative's success, he always gave the same answer. "We started by recognizing that everyone has value, everyone has something to contribute, and everyone deserves to be treated with respect. Once you get that foundation right, everything else becomes possible." The night Emma Crawford's car crashed near the Interstate 95 overpass, 2 lives were saved, hers from the fire and his from the despair of being forgotten. Sometimes the most important rescues are the ones that happen after the immediate danger has passed, when someone takes the time to see the worth in a person that society has overlooked. If this story of courage, compassion, and community transformation touched your heart, Remember that heroism comes in many forms and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is not to rescue them, but to give them the tools and opportunities they need to rescue themselves and help others do the same. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.